Good evening, everyone. I am Nitish, and on behalf of JNU Academy, I welcome you all to today's symposium. Today's symposium is centered on the book Writer, Rebel, Soldier, Lover: The Many Lives of a Gay, authored by Akshaya Mukul. Before beginning the discussion, let me briefly introduce the theme, panelists, and format of today's session. JNU Academic is an entirely student-driven open forum. The foundational principle of the forum is to enrich and invent possibilities of democratic and civil discourse inside the campus on issues that are of social relevance. Knowing there is not much institutional support for academic activities nowadays, we are entirely dependent on you for all types of financial needs. Kindly contribute so we can continue organizing talks and discussions such as this. The book in the discussion today, titled Writer, Rebel, Soldier, Rebel: The Many Lives of a Gay, is around 800 pages long text exploring the lives of a gay and was published in 2022 by Penguin Random House India. Sachidanand Hiranan Vatsyayan, popularly known by his pen name Agge, was a remarkable Indian writer, poet, novelist, literary critic, journalist, and translator in the Hindi language. Agge was born in Uttar Pradesh, took part in the Indian freedom struggle, and spent several years in prison for his revolutionary activities against British colonial rule. Neither history nor politics are linear and straight. It is full of contradiction. So was the life of Agge. The author writes, Agge was a contradictory person in many ways, a reflection perhaps of the complexity of the last century of Indian history, which saw two world wars, the rise of Gandhi and the struggle for freedom, independence and aftermath of the partitions, the ambitions of the Nehruvian state, the imperialment of democracy, and even the rise of the Hindu right. The author, with his years-long research, unveils all these phases of Agge with sound facts and figures. Now, I would like to introduce the panelists of today's session briefly. Akshaya Mukul is a writer and a journalist. He is the author of Gita Press and the Making of Hindu India, which won all the non-fiction literary prizes like the Tata Book of the Year Prize, Ramnath Goenka Award, Crossword Prize, Shakti Bhatt First Book Prize, and Ata Galata Prize. He is the recipient of New India Foundation, Homi Bhabha, and Jawaharlal Nehru Memorial Trust Fund Fellowships. Mukul was a political journalist for over two decades and worked in the Times of India, Hindustan Times, Pioneer, and the Asian Age. The first discussion of the symposium is Poonam Saxena. Poonam is a journalist, writer, and translator. She worked for the Hindustan Times for several years as editor of the Sunday magazine Brunch and then as editor of the weekend section. She continues to do a column for the paper which looks at our past through Hindi literature and Hindi movies. She has translated novels and short stories from Hindi to English, including Dharmveer Bharti's Gunahon Ke Devta and Rahi Masoom Raza's Scene 75. Our next discussant is Professor Trisha Gupta. Professor Trisha is a writer and cultural commentator with over 16 years of experience in the Indian media. She has been a regular freelance contributor and columnist on books, films, arts, and culture to a wide range of publications, including The Caravan, Open, The Indian Express, Mint Lounge, First Post, Stall, The Wire, The Hindu Business Line, Biblio, Smithsonian Magazine, Mumbai Mirror, and India Today. She has a BA in History from the University of Delhi and MA from the University of Cambridge and MPhil in Cultural Anthropology from Columbia University. She lives in Delhi and is a professor of practice at the Journalism School at the O.P. Jindal Global University, Sonipat. Her social media handle is Chota Hazri. And to chair the session, we have with us Professor Asa Sarangi. Professor Sarangi is professor at the Center for Political Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and has been teaching there since 2003. She was the chair of the center for 2 years, 2019 to 2021. In 2016, she was invited as a visiting professor at the Center for South Asian Studies of the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, UK. She was the honorary guest lecturer in 2007 for AIS IES Delhi for the India Study Abroad program. Prior to this, he was a lecturer at the Committee on Southern Asian Studies and Division of Social Sciences of the University of Chicago in the year 2002, 1996 to 98, and in 1992 to 93. She obtained a PhD from Department of Political Science at the University of Chicago. She has been awarded numerous fellowships, including the University of Chicago and Endowed Fund Fellowship for the Graduate Studies Program at the Department of Political Science, University of Chicago for 4 years, 1989 to 1993. Dissertation Fellowship awarded by the Mellon Foundation, University of Chicago in 1993. In addition, she was awarded the Junior Fellowship of the American Institute of Indian Studies in 1993 to 1995. She also reviewed Junior Fellowship by the Department of Culture of Government of India and the Social Scientist Award in 2003 and 2007 under the Indo-French Cultural Exchange Program respectively. She was invited to a global partner for the Swiss National Science Foundation funded project in Geneva, Switzerland. The main areas of her interest are political and cultural economy of development in modern India, state and development in India, identity and politics in South Asia, and more specifically, the politics of linguistic nationalism in modern India. She has written extensively on areas of language, nationalism, state formation, and identity construction in edited volumes and various journals. She has written extensively on her areas of research, including the most recently written a new introduction to V.P. Menon's volume Integration of Indian States, which has been republished by the Orient Blankson in 2014 after 6 decades. She has edited a volume with Sudha Pai titled Interrogating Reorganization of States, Culture, Identity and Politics in India, published by Routledge 2011. She has edited a volume titled Language and Politics in India, published by Oxford University Press 2009, paperback edition 2010. Besides this, she has published about 4 dozen articles in peer-reviewed journals and edited volumes on various themes. We welcome all the panelists here. The format of the discussion is as follows. The book's author gets a maximum of 15 minutes to speak on the book, followed by each discussant speaking for about 10 to 12 minutes each. After that, the student discussant of today's symposium, Supriya Ranjan, will make his comments briefly in 8 to 10 minutes, and then author shall then reply to the discussants in brief. After that, Professor Sarangi will give her remarks as the chair of the session today and then further open up the discussion for the audience. We are heartily grateful to all our chair and speakers for accepting our invitation. Now I would like to hand over the podium to Professor Sarangi for further proceedings.
Thank you so very much. I think this is one event we, the faculty at the center, really look forward to because our students' initiative in founding this JNU initiative and inviting not just the books published, newly published books on our subject of political science or social science, but I'm really thrilled today that you have decided to have a panel on a book which I think is remarkable. And I would say much more when my turn comes. But thank you so much for organizing this. And it's really a privilege to have all of you with us. The distinguished panel, which has already been introduced. Let me just now take the honor of inviting the author, Mr. Mukul. Akshaya Mukul. I don't know which one is your first name or last name, but I know Akshaya is the first name. These days, one has to be a little careful. I hope I don't make a mistake. So let's welcome Mr. Akshaya Mukul and let's give it.
Thank you, Professor Sarangi. Thank you, JNU Academy, for this novel initiative that you have, completely student driven and dedicated of people, and you're running it without any university help. Thank you. Yeah, Is it okay now? Is it okay now? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And thank you, co-panelists, Trisha and Poonam. I have been kind of speaking to them. I did a long interview with Trisha and Poonam. We have been kind of doing it for Movie Fest. So yeah, I didn't know about this format as well. I had to speak for 15 minutes. I'll maybe speak for 5, 6 minutes. So I'll kind of not follow that. So this book, roughly, I'll tell you how this book kind of happened. The first book I had done was a Hindu nationalism, and I was working actually on something, another aspect of Hindu nationalism, biography of one of the gentlemen who was a kind of a founding, one of the founding key persons of the way we see Hindu nationalism manifest now. And I just completely, I had almost 15-20% work I had done, and one evening I was sitting with Professor Basda Dalmia, who had just come back to India from Berkeley. And I just said, why, how come no one has written on it? Yeah, we were talking about the larger Hindi literature, the biography writing, and she said, well, you should do it yourself. And I had written a long piece on Akshaya, three centenarians in 2011, which was Nagarjun, Samser, and Akshaya. All three were born in 1911. So I had written a long piece for now defunct weekend magazine paper called Crest of Times of India, which ran for a few years. And I said, well, how does one go about it? I don't know where his papers are. And within half an hour or 40 minutes, he kind of said he knew where the papers were. And one thing led to another. And I kind of decided I'll do this. And I spoke to some people who I normally consult when I'm kind of caught in this kind of a jam. And someone I really kind of admire a lot, he said, well, take a break from Hindu nationalism and do this. This might be fun. Well, I kind of another problem was with Akshaya. See, he died only in '87, so there are far too many people who are around who knew Akshaya. And Hindi world, I realized that in 2011 when I was working on him, that Hindi world is virtually vertically divided. Those who love Akshaya and those who don't like love Akshaya, and everyone has their own story, and everyone speaks with more authority than the other person, almost as it was their deed. And I also realized he's the most contentious Hindi literary figure of the last century. Also the kind of life he led, kind of his writings, everything put together. Uh, so, there was this. So when I finally got hold of his private papers, running into, I didn't realize that someone could keep papers so well. Right from 1911 onwards till he died, he had almost kept every piece of paper, except the phase when many relationships that he went through, and you could see that the women were walking away with some bit of papers, and especially his second wife, Kapila Vatsaya, a very known person, cultural authority. She had walked away with a lot of papers, so I could never get her side of the story, and she was not very helpful. She said, "I can't talk about him." She didn't talk. Uh, but then the papers said a story which was very different from what one was hearing from people and everyone who claimed to be authority. And especially in Delhi, you have too many people who have authority on Akshaya. Just too many people. Delhi, as it is, has this problem, and that comes to even literary figures. But his paper said something very different. Very different. Be it there are two, three contentious things about his life. Number one, you will talk to any Akshaya person who knows Akshaya will tell you number one that he was uh, never was a revolutionary. Some will say that he was the biggest revolutionary at par with Bhagat Singh. Both are not true. He was a revolutionary, all right. I will not draw comparison, but there are so many myths around Akshaya. For instance, that he was the man who was supposed to kind of kidnap Bhagat Singh when he was on way to court on Sunday. And the myth, what makes it myth, is that a girl learned driving a day before this was to be done. And who's going to do that? If you have to kidnap someone, you're definitely not going to entrust the job
to someone who has just learned driving 24 hours earlier. But those who love Akshaya will always give you this story. Similarly, they will say that he was a CIA agent. He was a student of the British before that. So, how do you explain a man? Someone in the introduction, he explained the man who was a man of contradictions. So, a man who was a revolutionary of the 30s, spent 4 years in jail in very rough conditions. He joins British Army in the 40s. How does that happen? Revolutionary of the 30s becomes a soldier in the early 40s during the Second World War, gets posted in Northeast, in Ceylon, and many other areas. And he is also the one, and he says that it's my idea is that to deal with fascism is far more important than dealing with criticism. And his novel Nadi Ke Dweep, which, as I discovered, is far more autobiographical than Sekhar Ek Jimni, which is also autobiographical, uh, is basically the most eloquent um, take on fascism or anti-fascism and why he did what he did. But his critics have not kind of forgiven him for that. They call him the this too. Then comes the 50s. A man, he joins Congress, CIA-funded Congress for Cultural Freedom, and he becomes a key person for a very brief period. Actually, it ends on a very unsavory note, very sad note. But he keeps the relationship with some of these people who were very key people, be it Vladimir Nabokov's cousin Nicholas Nabokov, or be it various other writers and poets of America and in Europe. He keeps a close tie, and till 80s he's in close touch with them. They help him uh, travel across Europe, in US. He gets many fellowships. Fellowships, actually, his wife also helps. Kapila was a big officer. She was secretary in the education department. So here is a man who is full of such contradictions. Uh, how do you kind of write about it? Everyone has a something to tell you about it. So I relied entirely on archives. And that archive took me to various places. Professor Sarangi was asking me about the archive that Love and I love the Regenstein Library in Chicago, which tells you about his so-called CIA connection. His friends were part of this Congress for Cultural Freedom, their papers in Stanford, some bit of papers in New York, Sleepy Hollow archives. So that's how one could kind of put together things about his life. Is a life full of contradictions. It's a life full of ambivalence. As he himself said once to, I think, Nemi Chanjan's wife, Rekha Jain, that if there is one person who's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it's me. I'm full of such contradictions. It was a rare confession to make in the 50s, no, not in the 40s, just when his father had died. So, so this, in kind of in a brief, was his life, just full of contradictions. Then, about again, we'll also hear fascinating people with more authority than probably even his papers say about his love life, his romantic life, which is very different from what we hear and what existed is very different. It was a very kind of, you can say, it was a very interesting love life. That much is there, but to have how do you write about something which was generally it becomes a problem when you're writing about someone's romantic life unless and until you have enough documents or archival stuff to back it up. And I realized that in his case he had kept most of it. He had kept basically the relationship with his own first cousin, which is problematic to the world when the novel came, which is autobiographical, Sekhar, which is full of his relationship with his first cousin. So that was a bit of kind of was difficult in the sense I didn't write anything which was outside the papers. There were many things people were telling me. And with Agya, I also realized one of the problems I faced, and I had to kind of later on deal with it in a very different way, was I must have interviewed 60 to 70 people because there were enough people who knew him. And I realized that with each person, the story changed. If you asked about one event, there will be 60 versions of that one event. And that became a problem. Only two people, I always name these two people who stood out. One was Krishna Surti at the age of 93. She didn't say anything which she didn't know. And whatever she said, you could cross it. That was the greatness of Krishna Surti. And another person was Krishna Baldev Nair. To a large extent, Mukul. Unfortunately, all three are not there. Uh, all of them passed away before the book came. So I relied mostly on these kind of interviews, which could be kind of cross-checked. Otherwise, there were people who were telling you different kind of story. Even after the book came out, as late as few months back, someone called me, a very senior person who runs a big TV channel in Chhattisgarh, that I believe you are related to Akshaya. So I said, well, look, I'm Akshaya, he was Akshaya, but we are not related at all. And he said with so much, and the person who told him is one of the leading Hindi writers. So, these kind of things get passed around a lot in Hindi literature. I'm not saying only in Hindi literature, but that's what my interaction has been. And against biography, writing one education or thing that one thing I realized and I've learned is the pettiness of the Hindi world has not changed. If you see Agay battling the pettiness of Hindi world, because he was never considered. He, unlike the writers of his generation and subsequent generation, didn't come from so-called Hindi heartland. He was a Punjabi. And he says, the year before he dies, he writes to someone saying that, look, they never considered me as one of their own. They always thought I'm an outsider. Now they've stopped reading my books. So that pettiness which he faced, and not only he, you'll see Nirmal Verma's story, he's facing the same problem. Nirmal again is in a way outsider. Nirmal too is a Punjabi, Nirmal comes from a very different background. They're not your Mofussil, they're not people with Mofussil background. Agay is son of whose father is a higher official, very high official in the colonial government. He's an archaeologist and epigraphist. So is Nirmal. Nirmal comes from a well-off background, Simla, various other places. So these people are battling that. And then I realized that, this pettiness has not changed. After the book came, I'll tell you a bit about the response and then I'll end. Some people called me, people who were very close to Agay, they write that okay, you have written about this particular event happened there, but you didn't write that I was involved in organizing that event. So what do you do with that? You say that look, I'm not right. I was not unfortunately or fortunately I was not writing your biography because Agay's biography can't be writing. And then people who love him are very very upset even now. Some very close to Agay, they were not initially. That why do I have to kind of write about someone's love life. And I had to give 10 biographies to this gentleman who I have not named of writers across, like from T.S. Eliot to Philip Larkin to, writers of great writers to just read the biographies and see how love life is not important. Why is it not important? So some people are cut up with that. So so again in life or after death or in his biography continues to be controversial. That's what again is for you. I think most of it will come during the discussions when Poonam, Krisha and all talk. So I leave it at that.